Dear aspiring academics, welcome to the Academic Diaries, where we will talk about the different journeys people in different levels of academia take to become fully fledged professionals in their fields. My name is Itzel. I'm a third-year physics PhD student at the University of Virginia. As a beginner academic, I am curious about the paths people take to grow their careers. I hope that by asking questions to interesting people, we can learn more about all the options that we are, for now, blind to. So sit down, or walk, or wash your dishes, or maybe procrastinate that thesis you may be writing, and enjoy the chat. Today, we will talk to Dr. Stefan Baessler. He is a professor at the University of Virginia specializing in nuclear and particle physics. Professor Baessler is pushing the boundaries of fundamental physics by doing ultra-precise testing of the Standard Model. He uses cold and ultra-cold neutrons to probe everything from neutron decay to gravity at quantum scales. He's involved in cutting-edge experiments and is helping crack the mystery of the muon's magnetic moment through G2 measurements. Thank you, Professor Baessler, for coming to the podcast and sharing a little bit of your story with me.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you again for coming to the podcast. All stories have a beginning. So what was your start into physics?
Well, the answer is probably as long as I can remember. I don't know for sure what I thought what I would do in primary school. Certainly fire marshal was on my list like on many other boys at that time. But in middle school, I started to think first that I would do either electrical engineering or physics, which is of course pretty close. And at some point I made a decision. Actually pretty late, after high school was over. I thought it's the engineering. It was more clear which jobs I would take. But in Germany at that time, there was a draft system, so I had to go to the army first. And among many other things, I learned two things. For one, I can do things which have nothing to do with academia. And the second is science is more interesting.
Oh, so how long did you spend in the army?
Only what was required of me, which is 15 months.
What is being in the army like? Is it similar to the US? Do you start as a private?
Yeah, the titles are of course different, but yes, you start at the bottom and you end at very close to the bottom. There's also a basic training, and afterwards I was pretending I could repair tanks.
I guess if you wanted to do electrical engineering, maybe some of the electrics in the tank.
Yeah, that was probably why they put me there. I didn't really touch much.
That is very different to here in the US. You kind of took a gap year of sorts. Did you go straight to undergrad after that?
I went to university. In Germany, the school is also a year longer, which means that incoming German students are at least 2 years older than what you are used to in America.
I've also heard that there is a master's degree before the PhD as well. You don't have straight PhDs like we have here in America.
Yeah, so for those who are listening, don't take this as an introduction how the German system works, because it doesn't work that way anymore. But at that time, you would do a diploma, which is maybe equivalent to a master's, maybe more, and the PhD afterwards. The diploma I got after 10 semesters of studying plus 1 year of a thesis. You were still officially a student. I did graduate with 13 semesters, and it was a little bit below average. So you hear why the Germans changed their system. They said the students are too old when they come out of it.
I actually ended up being 2 years older than everybody else. I took a gap after my undergrad, and when I moved to Canada, I was going to start in grade 10, but I decided to do grade 9 instead. They told me, if you do only 3 years of high school, you'll have to take the IELTS. And I didn't want to do an extra test, so I said, I'll go 1 year back. So I graduated a little older than everybody else. The IELTS, for those who have spoken English their whole life, is the International English Language Test System. And it's a standardized test to see how well you speak the language. And it has a fee of around $250, which was very expensive for my family at the time. The money was definitely one of the reasons for me to not want to take it. The other is that I am really bad at standardized tests.
I don't know how you felt about this. At that time, you may have been worried or so, but of course, looking back now from my age, why not?
Yeah, I think sometimes we feel there is a race to the end where we have to be young to do things, but the average human life is long nowadays. I am happy to have taken my time, and it allowed me to adapt to Canada better and to understand the culture and incorporate myself. I think if I had started in grade 10, it wouldn't have been the same. I used to feel funny about it because I was older than everybody else, but I'm grateful that I made those decisions. I'm grateful that I took a little bit longer.
I can understand that changing the country is a big step, which I did much later in life than you.
You did. And I think it does not get any less scary even when one is more mature. But before you moved to another country, you had to do your undergrad. What was that like for you?
One other difference between the US and every other country I know is when you go into undergraduate, you go into your major. You are not going into university and next is the choice of a major. You have already chosen and you study the major. There is no general education or anything for me because it was a physics major. Together with what they want you to take for the physics classes, that was at that time math and chemistry. Taking classes is actually much more reasonable in the sense that there are no grades. There are no exams, there are no tests. The threat is at the very end, there is an oral examination about what you studied. So in my case, at the end of 5 years, I had oral examination with 4 professors. Topic was physics. And at that time, that was very scary. And we didn't like it. And there are thousands of stories where the exam went bad because the professor didn't like the student.
My first gut response to you telling me that everything was oral exams at the end is like, that is awesome because I really dislike written exams and I tend to blank when I look at written questions on a paper.
Now I sold this as if it would be a big advantage, but I mean, the same story which you just said about being nervous before the exam, I believe that is worse if you have an oral exam and you have nothing to go into and you have just the next 45 minutes which decide about the success of what you did in the last 5 years. But it's not necessarily an advantage for everybody.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I remember my first oral exam in undergrad. It was on Zoom, thankfully, I think, because if I had seen them, I probably would have freaked out. But I talked and talked and talked, and I don't remember anything now. I think my brain has blocked the entire ordeal. But I remember finishing and thinking, oh, I probably did so terribly. I don't even know what I said. But somehow they didn't notice I was nervous and they thought I did pretty good. That was experiment. I'm much better at experimental stuff than I am at theory.
I can relate to you. My theory exam went the same way. I went out of the door at the end and I only remembered all the things which I didn't know and I thought I failed. The professor told me afterwards, he asked difficult questions and I got the best grade. But in my own view, I had a very bad 10 minutes waiting while they were discussing.
They do that thing where they make you exit the Zoom call and then you enter again because they're discussing. So I remember I was shaking and they were like, that was excellent. That was great. And I was thinking, for who? I don't think we were in the same interview. But that's funny that we had a similar experience. It is really good that you and I were wrong and we actually did well. In the line of exams and classes, did you have any favorite class in undergrad?
The class which I liked most is probably a class in math, which I took. But it's mostly because I liked the teacher so much. While I decided at the end not to switch to math or anything, he was really inspirational. That was ordinary differential equation. They prove things about properties of differential equations, and the interest at that time was chaotic differential equations with strange attractors and generally interesting solutions. And well, I didn't do that at the end, but that was my favorite class. You asked me.
Ordinary differential equations, or ODEs, is maybe the coolest math concept ever, if you like math. And it grows into something called partial differential equations, and those are even more awesome. I don't think any of you care about the names, but you probably care a little bit about why we are talking about them. They dictate everything around you in the most beautiful way. More importantly, they're the basis of chaos theory, which, you look at the weather, they never get it right. That's chaos. If you want to read a book for anybody, even if you don't like math, I highly recommend Sync by Steven Strogatz. I'll put a link for that in the description. He describes where we can find chaos, and you don't need any math. You just need to fall in love with how chaotic but yet organized the world is. So highly recommend that book. When I was an undergrad, I got really into ODEs. I wanted to become a chaos theorist. I just loved the beauty of the chaos. Seeing the world in math feels really good. Enough about classes we loved. Was there any class that you really did not like?
Not in the sense that I hated a class, but there were, of course, classes which are less interesting than other ones. And again, it's probably more a question of how it's taught than the particular class. For example, always a very thankless class, which you, as an instructor, always hope the students have at the beginning catch up on and review all kinds of math topics. We also had such a thing. And at that time, it's solving problems which I didn't have at that time. They only came in the following semesters. And so while the professor who knew what was coming was trying to help us a lot, it was just one technique and another technique and another technique that doesn't motivate.
It can get a little boring learning all these things that you're like, what am I using this for? Sometimes you don't know what the thing is going to be used for, but eventually we'll all find out, especially after undergrad. Once you were done, did you want to go directly to a PhD or did you have any other plans?
I knew I wanted a PhD, and at that time I did something much later than what you do. I regretted that I was never studying or seeing other than for vacation a foreign country, and I wanted to go abroad. I spent some time driving around in France and trying to make contact with various groups of friends. And some people were pretty receptive, and most people didn't actually like to just find somebody in front of the door asking for a PhD, not like in the sense that they didn't like anything which I said, but in the sense of positions are not just open, you have to make positions. So for a professor, it's a waste of time if somebody asks, can you take me? No, right now. So that actually brings me to another difference in the German, or probably, again, France at least, is the same system. You're not applying at a school in your time as a PhD and then you are taking classes and everybody comes at the same time. You are applying at a person, and if the person says yes, the person will pay you and you go directly into research.
Oh, what was your pitch to tell them that you wanted to work in their group?
I have no idea how to sell myself. I told some people what I did before. Sometimes there was a connection. Sometimes I could use it. It's not that my advisor for my diploma thesis helped really a lot, but he gave me a couple of names. And of course, these were names of people who know him. And so I dropped the name of Professor Hunklinger and hoped that it helped. And it actually did help, although not really. One of the French professors who rejected me called up my advisor 4 months later when it was too late for me and said there were these two people, I was with a friend, who wanted to come. I actually liked both of their presentations. I now have a place. Are they still available? Neither one of us was.
Oh, no, it was too late. I guess for America, we would do a CV and we would do that letter where you were like, I love physics, or this is what I did, please take me.
Of course, I said the same thing, please take me. But
I guess when you're looking for an advisor, you do have to go knocking on doors and being like, do you have space here? But I think it's a little easier because you're already in the program.
Well, it's particularly difficult if you do that in a foreign country in a different language and don't know anybody. Many people stay where they are, and then, of course, you don't even need to apply. And otherwise, the advisor can be more helpful in finding a different place.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it could be simpler or harder depending on how you do things. Did you speak French fluently, or when did you learn French?
French was my third foreign language, so not really that great. I ended up in France, not at a French university. I stayed at my university, but for an experiment which took place at a large facility in Grenoble in France. And so I lived there for a little bit more than a year. My favorite story is when I was somewhere in a bar with a very long table. We had neighbors, and at some point, the neighbors heard us talking and they asked me, are you Canadian? And I felt my French is so good that they think I'm Canadian because we had to talk French. They didn't immediately realize that it's a German accent.
That is such a nice compliment. Your French must have gotten really good because, I mean, people from Quebec speak French obviously very well. I believe they have a little bit of a different accent from people in Paris, but, I mean, that's a great compliment. Once you were done your PhD, did you decide you wanted to stay in Europe?
My PhD advisor told me that if I wanted to stay in academia, then I should have a postdoc in the US, but at least something which is different than elsewhere. And he told me I should apply for a certain program where the German government would actually pay for me getting to the US. And while I was looking for the project, so I was in the US for a conference and then traveled around again with a friend and visited a couple of places which were recommended by my advisor and my friend. And everywhere, of course, I could make the pitch. I'm looking for a postdoc and I bring my money.
It's a very good pitch.
So I ended up in the group of Eric Adelberger and Blaine Heckel at the University of Washington in Seattle and did gravitation.
Oh, that sounds fun. What did you do in your PhD? Was it gravitational physics as well?
No, nuclear and particle physics.
I think you mentioned to me that you have transitioned from a lot of things to
Yeah,
a
it
lot.
just happened to be, I did a couple of internships all in atomic physics. My diploma thesis was in condensed matter using optical techniques. And now I'm back in neutron beta decay and gravitation.
You moved around fields a fair bit then. Was that difficult to do?
It's actually easier than it sounds. Many of the things you learn in one field actually have some relevance in another.
That makes sense. I mean, it's like learning languages. Sometimes one language bridges into another and it makes it easier to learn. And I could see how physics is like that. We all speak the same basic language, just terminology varies a little bit. Speaking of moving around a lot, what was your move to the US like?
The first couple of weeks are, of course, difficult. You have a visa status, but you have no bank account, you have no apartment. Actually, being in France helped me a lot. I slept for 2 weeks on an air mattress on the floor in the living room of a French postdoc there who was so happy that he had somebody who he could talk to. I think after 2 weeks, he was happy that I found something.
I remember it being similar when I came. The apartment I did have with the bank account and all the other stuff, you're just like, how do I get all? But everything finds a balance at some point, thankfully. How did you like your postdoc?
The work was well defined, and I mean, there was a plan. I think it's a famous military saying that no plan survives the contact with the enemy. So, of course, the plan didn't work, and then we had to make it work. One of the famous physicists wrote in his book about his life or so, there is a pleasure in finding things out. I absolutely have that. So, that we made it work gives me an enormous amount of pleasure, but it took a while.
I think that's part of being in the field is having to work on something for months, being like, I don't think this is going to work now. And then there's like a dip and suddenly it does work. And you're like, okay.
This is actually, there's a lot of theory about that. When I was in my PhD, I took my experiment to France and so away from anybody who could support me together with 2 diploma students I was responsible for. And it didn't work for a while. And you really doubt yourself in such a situation.
I think it teaches you a lot to go through those moments where you're like, I don't think I know anything. But if you come out the other end, even if things don't work out, at least you learn.
That is true, but it's of course less pleasurable.
It is slightly more painful, but hopefully over time has a lot more value. How long was your postdoc?
2 years. That particular postdoc was 2 years. I got married at the end and decided to finish. I could have stayed longer. And I left the project, which was on the verge of getting great. Maybe it wouldn't have gotten great if I would have done it, but the person who I took instead did a great job. It was a paper with about 1,000 citations. Anyway, I went back to Germany with my then wife and I decided to leave academia. And so I had a couple of places where I could go. And at the end, I went to a company where I was responsible for the statistical methods in quality control in mostly car industry.
Oh, wow. That is the first time I hear someone who left academia and came back. Generally, that doesn't happen. How long did you work in the car industry?
I did that for 2 years. And again, I decided science is more interesting. And I was very lucky. Normally, getting out of science is a one-way street. But it turns out a very similar project to the one which I did in my PhD lost the main protagonist, a friend of mine. I actually helped him to set it up in the time when I knew I would leave sciences. But he prematurely got a call to be a professor at the University of Munich. And that experiment needed a new head. So I got the offer and I went back to academia as something which is in between a postdoc and a professor. Could call it a research assistant professor or so, but there's not really an equivalent in the US system. At that time, how the Germans would groom new professors. If you are successful, then you will get a call. Again, they changed it.
What was it like to leave academia for those 2 years?
One thing which was very different, I didn't own the company, so it was a 9-to-5 job, Monday to Friday, so you wouldn't work on the weekend or something like this, which was good for my family. We had little kids. Working at a university in sciences is much more relaxed. And it has to be, because you are talking to people. We all realized during the pandemic how much is lost if you can't tell somebody, I get stuck with this and this, and somebody who you didn't know actually has something which helps you. The work at the company was much more dedicated. You talk to somebody if you need to. You get very much more help. If there's anything which is on your desk which somebody else can do, filling out forms, testing software, they would hire somebody who gets less money than me. And who would do that? It's not in a university, professors are mostly left alone. There was a lot of math and little physics because my job was mostly programming complicated statistical equations.
How did you start working in this company?
I have a friend who was a friend of one of the owners. That first set of owners now retired. The car companies all decided that they don't want to lose the knowledge of that company, and so they just bought it. It still exists. And sometimes they are still looking for people.
That's good to know. If I want to exit academia, I'll keep that in mind. I guess I would have to learn the software.
Let me tell a little bit more about the software. Suppose you are building an important screw, and since it has to fit, it has certain specifications. So the company builds 1 million screws. You test 1,000, and then you get a precise instrument, you get a bunch of lengths. It's very important that they are all within the specification, but you test only 1,000. So what the software actually does is giving you a yes or no if your 1,000 lengths, is it likely that there is less than 2 failures in the million screws which you are selling? For the people who build cars, an important and a complicated question.
I find that fascinating. Having more than 1 or 2 mistakes would be so catastrophic. I mean, we all rely on our cars working really well. I think we do not really consider all the steps that are taken to make sure that everybody is safe. I mean, it's not just cars, right? Buildings, everything around us has somebody like you who makes sure that they don't collapse. But what made you leave this job?
I felt I would have done the same thing over and over again. Finding new methods, changed methods, advertising them to customers, repairing the bugs, following software upgrades and things like this. It's not the change which comes with doing science. Also, a very good part of my reason to leave science was my family, but it became clear that I could do science and have a family at the same time. In fact, my wife supported me a lot in that.
I've said it before, but I always want to point out the invisible work of women and people who stay home and support their partners in their endeavors. Thank you. It is fortunate, then, that you were able to return to academia. You were an associate professor in Germany. Did you ever get a promotion?
No, there's no such thing as a promotion on the same job in Germany. You get promoted by taking a different jobs. That's by design, because people feel that the university would always promote their own people if they were allowed to, so they are just not allowed to. The goal of that 6 years was, if I would have not gone to the US, I would have written a third thesis, which was called the habilitation, and afterwards I would have looked for a professor position elsewhere. And I can do that anywhere in Germany but the place I was.
Are things still the same now?
It's changed. There's now something similar, but once you get the professor position, you have tenure.
That sounds like a difficult process. Did a lot of people end up in industry?
There's a much larger fraction of people studying physics in Germany than in the US. Heidelberg was the second or third biggest physics department in terms of undergraduate students, and we had about 200 in a year. Later it was 300. The biggest one in the US is at 140.
Wow. That is a lot of physicists. How many people get out of the PhD? There must be a lot more people leaving PhDs than in America then.
So the qualifying exam, which I should mention in the US or at University of Virginia as a reason why people leave the program. But if the experiment doesn't work, you have nothing to write about. And also if you find out you don't want to try anymore, it's not working, that's not the life you want to have. It's a perfectly valid reason to leave. What doesn't exist is that you fail the examination at the end of the PhD. Maybe I shouldn't tell you that. Nobody fails that.
No one will tell. This is a podcast secret, people. You are not allowed to share this with anyone. Just to keep in mind, though, you can still fail the qualifying exam here in the US. So there is a possibility to fail out of your PhD.
That's actually one of the things which I learned when I was first in the US. I saw the qualification exam, which they had in Seattle. It was a huge package. They had a lot of small questions. And I thought, while I was doing the homework problems there, I could do that. But not in 3 hours, not in 30 hours.
That's actually another reason for me where exams don't really work, is that I don't think science has that in an hour I need to figure out this problem, right? When you're doing research, it's not an hour. It's maybe weeks, years sometimes, that you're figuring out the issue that you're trying to solve.
In the defense of the people who plan that, you can keep a certain number of open questions in your mind. But if you start to work on a problem and you realize, well, I have forgotten how the atomic orbitals work. I have to look that up. And while you look that, I have forgotten how spherical coordinates work, and you look that up. And while you are doing that, you have forgotten how vectors work. And you will never come to an end if there's too many things which you don't know.
That is very true. There are things that are permanently tattooed in my head, but I'm a little slow in coming up with things because I get nervous. I've had that explained to me as that when you're really anxious, you kind of cut the access to the part in your brain that can think. And so that's what happens to me. And even though I might have memorized everything, I can't make anything out of it. It's a tattoo that goes away if I have to write an exam. But I'm going to be done talking about tattoos. You returned to academia and you did your habilitation. You applied to UVA after that?
I applied for a couple of positions, and the one I took was the one here.
What made you choose Virginia?
I didn't had so many choices at the same time. I had a choice. I could have gone to Switzerland, and I didn't. I didn't get another offer in Munich, so there was no other choice. And in Vienna, I told them I withdraw my application. I wouldn't come anyway. So then I was in the US. How I got here, I honestly don't know. I got an email from somebody who has no connection to me that there's this position you can apply.
You don't know me, but I know you, and you should come here. And you started here as an assistant professor?
That somebody was the director of the lab in Oak Ridge. And that my position is special in that it's a joint faculty appointment. It's half an Oak Ridge position and half a university position. I'm only half professor.
How long do you spend in Oak Ridge versus here?
How to say this? I'm a diamond member of the Hilton hotel chain. Way too much. And that's not something to be proud of.
I feel diamond member probably comes with some perks at least.
No, you don't want them. Well, my experiment is there. I mean, that's like one thing which is nice in AMO, although that was also part of why I left it, was that you have your experiment at home and you can just go to your lab and do it there. I have to travel to my experiments. I'm very lucky to have a position that I'm actually paid specifically to do that. Most professors have to do that in addition to their normal job. But nevertheless, my main experiment is in Oak Ridge. I have a second experiment, which is in Grenoble in France. I have a third experiment, which is in Geneva.
It's fortunate that you said 3 languages?
Well, my French is largely gone. Nobody would think anymore I'm Canadian.
It was only recently that I realized that sometimes the experiment is not at home and you have to travel to get to it. By home, I mean like at the university that you're working at. My friend has to travel a lot. Actually, both of my friends, because they do neutron scattering and they have had to go to many places in order to do their experiment, whereas I just walk to UVA and I have it there. How many places in the US could one travel to for your line of work?
I do experiments with neutrons in the US, only in Oak Ridge National Lab. There is a place in Los Alamos where I've been, but I don't have an experiment there. And there's a place in Washington, Gaithersburg.
How easy is it to get time to work on stuff there?
Well, it was a long process. We proposed our experiment and we got funding 5 or 6 years later.
What do you do while you wait for that? Do you focus on theory?
On a different experiment. It's also not that you do only one at a time, but from the conception until you can start building it, until it's working, until you have taken the data, until you can publish the result, there's always years in between. And that's not an advantage of the field.
Would grad students that go to that field take longer to graduate?
I don't have statistics. You don't expect a grad student, of course, to follow all of that all the time. Before we had funding, I didn't have a graduate student on that project. I had graduate students on a different project. Once we had funding, I had graduate student who built a thing for that experiment with a certain property, which is very difficult to achieve. He was probably the best one in the world at that time who did that, but he didn't wait for the usage of his thing.
I guess this affects how the university would consider tenure in a way, since achieving a result takes a bit longer. I would hope that they don't expect you to work super quickly.
The universities have to adjust their expectations of what's going to happen in these 5 or 6 years, which you have until your tenure is decided on. Question is still, what is the expectation?
It is definitely not to discover the Higgs boson in 10 years, although they would definitely have to hire someone that does something like that. I mean, it took 52 years to do that. Imagine if somebody did that in 5. It would be a superhuman feat. Now that some time has passed since you got tenured, what would you say is your favorite thing about being a professor?
Mostly that I can decide what I do. Not always when, and of course there's a bunch of duties which have deadlines, not only as a student. I mean, the lectures have to work, funding applications have to come in at a certain time. But it always feels like you have infinite freedom as a professor. Just unfortunately, you have so much to do for the next 3 weeks that you can't enjoy it. And that stays with me since I'm a professor. Nevertheless, the general feeling is still I have infinite freedom, even if not at that moment.
I kind of agree with that. There's a flexibility that comes with being able to do your own research, even if it also depends on funding and other things like that, which are not easy to navigate all the time. So, in the line of not so easy things, what is something you do not like about being a professor?
Well, the part with the support system in the company I worked with, that I have people who I can put tasks which are repetitive, which I can explain, I can give them to other people to do, that is helpful. The threat, maybe you lose your funding. What would I do if I have no research funding? The university does nothing. Actually, the German university would do something. American university does nothing. I'm not losing my position, but my students do. So that is not really something which I enjoy.
Professors really do have a lot of hats. Like you do finance and management, and I do think that can be really hard sometimes. So it would be nice if there was support. Like you said, you had some support where you worked in industry. That's a very reasonable thing to dislike. Now we're reaching to the end of the podcast. And I usually end it with some advice that you would give an undergrad or someone trying to inform themselves about academia. What is something that you would say to them?
I don't think I have really much which is so generally useful. I did, and maybe that's part of the advice, I did what interested me after I made this decision at the beginning. I don't take the engineering path, which is kind of the more obvious what I would do and that people would offer me jobs and things like this. I did what interested me most of the time and it worked out. And I couldn't have predicted the way how it goes. So all the worries, which of course I had when I was young about how could that end. And that was also wasted time.
It is nice to have the perspective now. I do feel sometimes I wasted a lot of time thinking about things that were a waste of time. But I also accept that that is all that I could do in that moment. So I don't necessarily fully regret it. But at the same time, I've learned from it.
You shouldn't agonize over decisions. Just choose one. At the end, you will know that if it was the right choice or not. But once you have all the information you can have for that decision, choose one.
Yes, I think sometimes the indecision comes from knowing what you want, but you're afraid of what it takes to get there. I realize that sometimes I avoid making decisions if people in my life are not going to approve of them. And once I started realizing that though I value the input of people who I love and care about, I also have to make decisions that I think are important to me and not be afraid of what others will think. I have to own my decision and own the mistakes that come out of that decision as well. And ever since I realized that, I'm not indecisive anymore.
I would change your story a little bit. I wouldn't even make a decision between what I want and what my environment, what my family wants is a step before. Thinking about this a week longer doesn't really make it any better.
That is true as well. There is a point where there's no net positive about thinking, and it can become detrimental if you're thinking about something for 10 years. You're doing nothing. There's no action. I also feel humans are very terrible at predicting the future. If you asked me, for example, if I'd be here 4 years ago, I would laugh at you. No matter how good my reasoning and predictions may seem, no matter how intelligent I think my decision is, I'm probably going to be wrong. However, I do think thinking about your decisions is not a bad idea. There's kind of like a balance, and everybody over time is able to discover their own point where they feel comfortable making their own decisions. On that lovely note, thank you so much for coming to the podcast. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
And I hope that the listeners will think likewise if anybody made it to the end.
I hope they did, if you did come to the end. So there you have it, another episode of the Academic Diaries. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Professor Baessler. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and do not forget to follow the podcast to see who the next professor will be. If you want to learn more about Professor Baessler, please check the link in the description. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and I will see you next time. Now, to the bloopers. The IELTS, Ordinary Differential Equations.